your weekly horoscope with Jerry and Matt.
Lights, camera, action!
Hey, good evening, horror fans. Welcome to another edition of the Weekly Horoscope. I'm host Jerry here with my partner Matt. And Matt, we kind of touched on it last episodes. We kind of pre-celebrated, but this is our 75th episode. And as we like to do to celebrate milestones, we like to tackle one of our lists in the horror genre, which I always enjoy, and it's always a good subject for debate. And our list this week is horror directors, the top 20 horror directors of all time. And what were your thoughts when we started doing this?
This list is almost impossible to nail, to get down right. If you asked me to do this list next month, it would be probably different. So you kind of just do your best to do, homage to like some of the best directors you can possibly think of. It's almost like making like a list of like best sports players. After the first 5 or 10, you're kind of like just throwing them like, well, this could be 11, this could be 13, and then you can switch that up a week later. It's really hard, but it's fun. But it's fun.
Yeah, I agree. I found myself when we started listing this and I started compiling my data, I'm like, well, maybe we should do 25. Maybe we should do 30.
Yeah.
And I think it's unique in some ways in that the horror genre, in Hollywood movies, you have stars that people follow. I want to go see the latest Tom Cruise movie,
Right.
or whoever that the star of the moment may be. I got to see in the 70s and 80s the new Clint Eastwood movie. But I think it's a little bit different in horror because they're smaller budgets. You don't typically have big name stars. The stars are often the director, where you're saying, oh my God, you see there's a new Wes Craven film, or Toby Hooper put out a new movie. I got to check that out.
Right.
So for the formative and development of this medium of horror, these guys are rock stars.
Absolutely. And that's something like, I know me and you do that. Like you'll sit there and say, oh, Eli Roth has this new movie coming out this Thanksgiving. You don't even ask who's in the movie. You're just like, oh, okay, that movie's going to come up. I'm going to go see it. Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, like you said, the directors are often the stars because they have that magic touch. They're the kind of the ones that are known to kind of put these things together and put their flair on it. And that's kind of what we're going for.
Yeah. And like, okay, this guy almost always makes a good movie.
Right. You know the style you're going to go into when you see a certain director.
Yeah. Again, compiling this list was super hard. I have a few that just missed my cut that I was going to mention as kind of honorable mentions. The Italian director Lucio Fulci, who I thought is really impactful, really influential, but a lot of his films are derivative of other people's films, and he for that reason I kind of left him off, although I admire his work and I'm not trying to knock the guy, but like Zombie 2 was his unauthorized sequel to Dawn of the Dead, and he made New York Ripper, which was kind of like a ripoff of Maniac. Like he took other American films and put his Italian flair on them, and for that reason he didn't make my cut. You got some honorable mentions as well. We can kind of go back and forth.
Yeah, there was a couple that I had as well. Tom Holland, doing Child's Play. I thought that movie was just so iconic that there's not enough. I didn't think there was enough for him to sit in the top 20, but definitely an honorable mention.
Sure, and Fright Night.
And Fright Night. Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, that's two pillars of 80 movies, but I would agree there's not a lot.
Two's
of
not
there.
enough. Yeah, yeah.
Somebody in that same boat is Todd Browning, who really brings to the table, Dracula, the Bela Lugosi, classic version,
Freaks.
Mark of the Vampire, and Freaks.
Yeah,
which I think I put Freaks at the top of that list for sure. But that's really it. And as great as Freaks is, I don't think it rises to the quality of top 20.
I agree. Some directors, they had a couple great movies, and they're kind of, they're known forever in that genre for the impact they had. But that's not really what we're going for in the category. I think we're looking for more like longevity, influence, like a plethora of work that they would have. Another one that comes to mind was for me didn't make the list was Alfred Hitchcock. He gets a nod for Psycho and The Birds, but then after that, how much horror was he really doing?
Right. Exactly. He was on my list and kind
And
of
Todd Browning was on mine.
set aside for the same reasons. Like, yes,
Yeah.
Psycho is all-time iconic, and you got The Birds, but beyond that,
This isn't that most iconic movies, right? This is the directors in their full resume, right?
exactly, perfectly said. Um, my third is Park Chan-wook, who gave us Old Boy, a movie we've covered,
Yep.
and Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance, and uh, Thirst. I think is probably his only pure horror movie, which is an excellent vampire film. Just a real twist on how that's approached. But more of his movies fall under the thriller or psychological thriller vein more than in the horror. So as much as I think his work is great, I left him out for that reason.
Right. And if like you had said, if the list had been expanded longer, we could have, there's room for these directors to be in there 100%.
For sure.
Another one I had was Steve Miner, Friday the 13th, which is one of the most iconic, figures in horror. But I just didn't think there was enough on his resume to kind of like be in the top 20 with a lot of these other directors.
Gotcha. And so, some things that really, you talk about longevity and you talk about depth of their work. There's some great new blood that if we did this list in 10 years, you said it'd be different in a month. I think if we did it in 10 years, it might be like completely upended. And you talk about Ari Aster, Robert Eggers, Lee Wanell, Jordan Peele, Fede Alvarez.
Yeah.
They've made some phenomenal movies, but the depth of work wasn't there for any of them to make my list.
Right. Yeah. Not enough movies. I agree. You just mentioned like Ari Aster and Jordan Peele and those guys. Like, there's still time for them to develop. Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Fede Alvarez has the new Alien film coming out, and as a perfect example of what we're talking about, if there was just a new Alien film coming out, I'd be interested. I'd be excited. But when it's Fede Alvarez with a new Alien film, I'm extra excited because his name's attached to it, and I've already seen the quality he brings to his work,
Right.
which is
And it makes
kind of
you
what we
wonder.
were talking about at the beginning.
Exactly. And it makes you want to see like, all right, what's that twist on this iconic, franchise going to be like? When is it going to help like re-energize it and revamp it? We'll have to see.
Absolutely. All right, so enough of the people who didn't make the list. Let's get into the list. You had first picked this list, so I start with number 20. And my number 20 top horror directors of all time is the late Stuart Gordon, who became well known in the 80s for Reanimator and From Beyond, two Lovecraft adaptations, possibly the two best Lovecraft adaptations we've seen. He was an accomplished writer who dabbled in sci-fi. He did some family-friendly screenplays, but his real mark came in the horror field. He did a remake of the Pit and the Pendulum. He had a very interesting sci-fi movie called Robot Jocks that I remember enjoying greatly when it came out. It was just so different than anything I had really seen. And he returned back to Lovecraft in 2001 with the film Dagon, which was a Spanish production. To me, the hidden gem in Stuart Gordon's library is a movie from 1987 called Dolls, which was an immediate follow-up to From Beyond, and it's just really well done. It's kind of an under the radar movie that a lot of people haven't heard of or seen. And I checked it out, of course, because the guy just put out two of my favorite movies of all time. I'm going to go see his next movie. And Dolls is really, really a well done hidden gem. He left us in 2020 too soon, too young, but his legacy lives on, and I have Stuart Gordon at number 20.
Yeah, I loved Reanimate. Yeah, I believe he wrote Honey, I Shrunk the Kids.
Yes.
Yeah, which is funny because on paper, that's a horror.
Right, exactly.
Right, but
until Disney gets a hold of it.
But it's a family comedy, and it kind of goes back to this thing I always say is how comedy and horror just blur that line. Like on paper, like what a messed up scenario, right? It's crazy scientist dad shrinks their kids, and they're stuck in the lawn trying to get back as like smaller than ants, and they're being chased by bugs and lawnmowers. know what I mean? Like, but it ends up being funny.
Premise of the original Fly, right? The 50s
Yeah,
version of The Fly.
yeah, exactly. And for number 19, I chose Eli Roth, who's an American filmmaker, writer, and actor. He's born in 1972. He began pointing the camera around at the age of 8 after he watched the movie Alien. Uh, Before graduating high school, him and his brothers had made over 100 short films. And he went on to film school in New York and then got various jobs working on production sites. And then in 2001, he filmed Cabin Fever on a budget of $1.5 million. And they sold that to Lionsgate and ended up making $35 million worldwide. And that kind of set him off to be a star right away at a very young age, like right from the get-go. Um, he had, some of his notable movies were Cabin Fever, Hostel, and the recent Thanksgiving, which I think they're going to try and put out a new Thanksgiving every year and try to compete with the Halloween theme, right? Because there's the Halloween movies and there's Christmas movies, but we don't have a lot of Thanksgiving movies. And I think he's going to try and start that trend and do it in a very gory Eli Roth way. So I think that should be interesting. And I think one of his hidden gems was the remake of Death Wish with Bruce Willis.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Eli Roth, my favorite movie of his is actually, for all the iconic films he's produced, was Thanksgiving from last year.
Yeah.
I just enjoyed that so much. It took all the classic tropes and put a twist on them, and it was just fresh and invigorating, and I really enjoyed it. But yeah, good choice.
Yeah.
Okay, at number 18 of our top horror directors of all time, I have Peter Jackson, which may seem like a surprise choice, but before Peter Jackson was winning Academy Awards for The Lords of the Rings, and before he just became immersed in the Hobbit world, he was a full-fledged horror guy. He got his start with a super low-budget movie, Bad Taste, which is a sci-fi horror comedy that relishes the low budget and throws every type of gore imaginable at the screen to often absurd, almost cartoonish effect.
Yeah.
He went on to make Brain Dead, which was called Dead Alive in North America, and puts a twist on the infected zombie type of genre with some crazy kills and just buckets and buckets of blood. He did a very interesting ghost story, and this is probably my hidden gem of Peter Jackson, called The Frighteners with Michael J. Fox, and it's got humor, and it's just like, there's no other movie like it, really. It's very unique in its approach and premise, and something that he pulls off wonderfully. And he did the loving remake of King Kong in 2005, where he took the original story and copied it. Basically, he didn't try to reinvent the wheel. He just updated it for modern special effects. There's some CGI that doesn't hold up quite 19 years later, but at the time was mind blowing.
That movie was huge when it came out. I remember,
Huge.
yeah, and I remember really liking it. I was like, oh, they didn't try to mess with it. They just kind of kept it as is and just did, like you said, a modern take.
They stretched it a little bit because they took an hour and a half movie, kept the
Made 2.5
exact same
hours.
plot, and made it 2.5 hours.
Yeah,
So he elongated certain sequences and added some really special effect flair. But you don't remake King Kong with that level of detail unless you love horror. So for all those reasons, Peter Jackson was my number 18.
yeah, and I remember Frighteners. I saw that in the theaters when I was a kid, and I loved it. So yeah, that's one of my favorite of his as well, because it was just like you said, it's unique. It was funny. It was just a good. It wasn't too goofy. It was kind of funny within the realm of what they were trying to do, so it worked well.
Mhm.
For number 17, Herschel Gordon Lewis, who was born in 1926 and died in 2016. He was an American filmmaker, and he was best known for creating the splatter subgenre of horror. He was often called the godfather of gore. After high school, he went on to earn a master's degree in journalism, and then later became a studio director for K40 TV in Oklahoma City. And then from there, he went on to make erotic films in the early 60s, just purely for profit. And then in 1963, he ventured into horror with Bloodfest. It was his first gore film. And the full-color gore display kind of started a trend that other filmmakers were really eager to start emulating, and it kind of set the whole splatter genre off. Some of his best-known films were Bloodfest, Wizard of Gore, and 2000 Maniacs. And one of the hidden gems was kind of like a comedy musical called The Gorgor Girls. That was like towards the end of his career.
Yeah, I had checked out when I discovered Herschel Gordon Lewis. I had checked out his film
Yep.
library, and of course, watching him today, you note the bright color and the unrealistic look
Right.
of the blood. But he did things in the '60s that
No
people
one was
just
doing that.
weren't
Yeah.
really doing. And
Yeah.
yeah, The Godfather of Gore was an apt title. My favorite movie of his is 2000 Maniacs,
It's
which
yeah,
was
it's one of his better ones. Yeah.
which was Deliverance before Deliverance, but done with blood and humor.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a storyline that's been copied over and over. The stranger in a different area, and it's not what it seems. So that was my
Yeah.
my favorite of his.
Yep.
Okay, at number 16, we have Jacques Tourneur, the French filmmaker. And the reason I think Mr. Tourneur was so influential and had a impact great enough to make my list was he helped guide horror from the Universal Monster era, where they devolved into mashups and it got increasingly silly and almost kid fare. He put a modern adult horror twist on films. His films were nuanced with adult themes and sexuality was present. And it really was such a strong shift from, Frankenstein meets the Wolfman and the
Where
Abbott
that
and
was going.
Costello, where that had gone. And we love those movies. We've talked about them at length, but they really did move from their origins into almost comedy. And he brought serious movies and kind of changed the direction of horror. He's best known for Cat People, but he went on a string in a row directing Cat People, I Walked with a Zombie, and The Leopard Man. And I actually feel his best film is the underappreciated Night of the Demon from 1957. So in my opinion, he changed what a horror film could be, opening doors for those that followed. And for that reason, Jacques Tourneur is at number 16 on my list.
Yeah, I was gonna say Night of the Demon. Just a very cerebral movie. When we did the '50s film episode, I was gonna pick that, but I had seen it when I was younger, and I wanted to pick something I hadn't seen before. But I do remember seeing that as a kid, and it was just it's just like a cerebral movie. Like you said, it took that '50s era, that '30s '40s Universal where it was getting goofy, and it just went serious. And I really like the direction it took. And you can actually get that on Blu-ray now.
Night of the Demon on Blu-ray, really?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Nice.
For number 15, Roger Corman, born in 1926 and died this past May in 2024. In 2009, he was given an honorary Academy Award for inspiring so many filmmakers over the years. Roger was known as a spiritual godfather of the New Hollywood and the king of cult for pioneering B movies. He founded New World Pictures and was a lifelong member of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Science. And in 1964, he was the youngest filmmaker to have an exhibit at the Museum of Modern Art in the British Film Institute. A very influential producer. I think he was, produced over 450, 490 movies. He was involved with a lot of movies. Some of his better known work was Bucket of Blood, The Mask of the Red Death, and The Little Shop of Horrors, which I think they've redone that into like a musical. And one of his hidden gems, which probably isn't one of his best movies, but I liked it, was The Creature from the Haunted Sea.
Gotcha. I'm glad you brought up Roger Corman because we just lost him last month. And I
Yes.
think his legacy extends so far and wide because making so many films, he pioneered low budget filmmaking, as you said. He'd
He's
often do
king of B
4
movies,
or
yeah.
5 films in a year. And he taught so many following filmmakers and actors that got their start with him. Like the Hollywood and the film industry in general wouldn't be the same without the efforts of Roger Corman. Not not known more for that than his directorial work, but my favorite film of his is the Pit and the Pendulum from 1961
Hmm.
with Vincent Price. I thought that
Vincent
was
Price.
an
Yeah.
excellent movie and did a great job.
Yeah, yeah, and just for his influence alone, I thought he had to be on the list.
Yeah, I'm glad you did because he wasn't on my list, and when you brought him forth, I was I was happy to that he was in there, and I felt like I should have had him in the first place. But
Yeah, he
good
was a
job.
student. He was a student of film, right? And wasn't just in it for the cash grab. He was really in it for the arts and sciences of it,
And a great, great
and just
teacher to so many.
exactly. Yeah.
All right. Number 14 on our list, Guillermo del Toro. Guillermo del Toro has had great success as a filmmaker, including Academy Awards, and he has forayed into some bigger, epic movies, big budgets, but he's never ventured too far from his horror roots. Even his big budget movies are horror tinged, if you will.
Yeah.
He's had forays with the kaiju in Pacific Rim. His Academy Award winning movie was a reimagining of The Creature of the Black Lagoon as a love story with The Shape of Water.
Hmm.
He began his career with a dramatically different take on vampirism with Kronos, a movie that we have covered, and followed it up with Mimic, which is a genetic horror. Did Blade 2, which is one of the best in that franchise.
Yeah.
And then the fantastical fantasy world he created in Pan's Labyrinth, which is a horror-tinged fairy tale. And he also made a Crimson Peak, which is another unique, twisted ghost tale. He's also currently reimagining Frankenstein for Netflix, and because of his pedigree, I'm very excited to see what that comes out.
Very excited for that. He's very like mystical, almost like with his visuals, with some of the stuff he does. You know, he really takes you. He can take you into another world, like with the way he's able to create a lot of his visuals. I think he's a brilliant director.
And
I love I
produces
loved Mimic.
films, and
Yeah.
he produces a lot of horror films. And yeah, in my opinion, his hidden gem is one of his best movies is a small period tale called The Devil's Backbone, which is a coming of age ghost story that is both beautiful and haunting. I caught that one afternoon, just randomly flipping. I said, "Oh, I've heard of this. I've never," and I was blown away. It was fantastic.
Yeah. I actually haven't seen that. I'll have to watch that. For 13, we have Sam Raimi, born in 1959. He's an American film director, writer, and producer. After buying a camera, he started making 8 millimeter films with his good friend Bruce Campbell, who he met in 1975. He started college and dropped out after 3 semesters because he wanted to go work on this little project he had called Evil Dead, and never looked back. In 1978, Campbell and Raimi and Robert Tappert filmed Within the Woods, which raised a significant amount of money. And then in 1981, they were able to finance it and put it out there. And you know, the rest is history. He ended up making one of the best franchises with Evil Dead in the horror genre.
Yeah, love Sam Raimi. Big fan. Always have been a big fan. I think my favorite film of his remains Evil Dead.
Yes.
And I'm actually probably in the minority, but I prefer the original to Evil Dead 2. I love them both, but yeah, the original Evil Dead is my favorite Sam Raimi movie. I also made Drag Me to Hell, which was probably the hardest going PG-13 movie that had been put out at the time. I can't believe that wasn't R-rated, but that movie was hardcore.
Yeah, it is. And you know, for my list for his movies, I had Evil Dead, Evil Dead 2, and Drag Me to Hell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Army of Darkness, Crime Wave.
Yep.
You know, he's got some hidden gems in there, but yeah.
He did Darkman in the early 90s.
Also, a prolific producer, another person who, just like Guillermo del Toro, who he created Ghost House Pictures, which you'll see at the front of so many horror movies that he didn't direct, but helps bring to life.
Right. And it's funny, outside of horror, he did the original Spider-Man movies, 1, 2, and 3 with Tobey Maguire, when those made $1 billion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And his first superhero foray was Darkman,
Right.
which was a very good movie.
Yeah. It was a cool twist to have. You know, I like the darker superhero movies when they're like Spawn and stuff like that and Blade.
Okay, excellent. Number 12 on our list is Tekashi Miaki, the Japanese director, one of the most prolific filmmakers ever, with over 100 directing credits since 1991. His hallmarks are extreme violence, almost cartoonish bloodshed, and shocking perversions. He likes to shock his viewers and push the envelope. He has created some landmark films that we've talked about before, some we haven't. Itchy the Killer, Audition, Three Extremes, One Missed Call are some of his most well-known films. He also does a lot of gang films, action films. He does everything. 100 movies since 1991 is just unheard of.
It's incredible. Yeah.
His famously his episode of the Masters of Horror anthology show was entitled Imprint, and it was deemed too vicious and violent and was dropped from the broadcast when Showtime picked up the series, but it was included in the DVD releases, and its reputation for extreme violence and torture is well earned. It is a hard show to watch, and he's a risk taker and a boundary pusher, and for those reasons, very influential director.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you watch some of his movies, like Ichi the Killer, you just see where there was how he influenced, a whole generation in front of him to like, oh, we want to make a bloody throat cut with a sword like that. Like he was just like buckets of blood, just the way it was flying out. It was just supremely violent, but done in a very just done well. It wasn't like tasteless. It's almost like just interesting, like how he was able to do something different.
Yeah, a style and an artistic
style.
flair.
That's the word I was looking for. Stylistic.
Skills.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And next, Mike Flanagan is an American filmmaker born in 1978. After graduating college and majoring in media and film, he made his first movie, Ghost of Hamilton Street, with just local Maryland actors. And then in 2011, he crowdfunded $70,000 and made his first feature film in his apartment, Absentia, which he, while he's created some great horror movies, he's also somewhat kind of pioneered the horror miniseries on Netflix with Haunting of Hill House, Midnight Mass, Haunting of Bly Manor, The Fall of House of Usher, and Midnight Club. And so he's kind of taken that streaming service route where he's been able to make a lot of these miniseries where it hasn't really been done that well before. Kind of like what I know HBO used to kind of do with some of their TV shows, but he's been able to single-handedly do that. Like since 2018, almost every year come out with a new kind of show, and they're just one after another. They're really good, and so he's able to make these movies like Gerald's Game and Doctor Sleep, and then also can do these miniseries where he can draw out like a story over like 11 episodes, 11 hours. And so I think he's a great director. He's a great storyteller.
Yeah, I love Mike Flanagan. I love the sensibility he brings to his work. I think Doctor Sleep is an underappreciated gem. I love that movie. It did the near impossible, melding the two distinct visions from Stephen King and Stanley Kubrick into a perfectly satisfying sequel to both their different takes on the original
Yes.
Shining. His hidden gem to me is Hush, which is a
Hush,
fantastic home invasion film. But if he ever completes his Dark Tower series and his career continues on his current arc, he could even climb way up this list. I love Mike Flanagan.
I think it's possible. I think he's in that direction, but we'll see.
Excellent. Number 10 on our list is Ty West. Ty West is a new age filmmaker with old school sensibilities. His film career began with the movie Roost in 2005, which is a bat-driven B-movie throwback into the vampire world with essence of zombies, and it's crazy, but it's very 70s B-movie-ish. He did Trigger Man, which is a Most Dangerous Game style hunting film, people being hunted, something that's been reproduced over and over now in the last 20 years to varying degrees of quality. He did a House of the Devil, which is an occult film very much in the vein of a Rosemary's Baby. And then he did The Sacrament, which is a found footage cult-based horror film. He was also part of the VHS anthology film that took off and started that franchise. And
hate it or
to me,
love it. Some people love them, some people hate them.
Yeah,
The
yeah, I
VHS,
think like with all anthologies, there's a mixed bag. But what put Ty West, with all that filmography we just talked about, what put him on this list and this far up this list is the trilogy that began with X. Uh, X to me is the throwback 70s. It's the closest thing to Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Hills Have Eyes since those movies. He takes a modern tale and just plants it square in the 70s, and it feels every bit what those movies felt. It's just different. It was outstanding. I loved it, and he followed that up with the prequel, Pearl, which is a completely different movie existing in the same world, and the soon to be released Maxine, which is then a sequel to X. All three films seem like very, very, very different tones and approach to horror, but all living in the same world. And from what he's done so far in that world, they're just outstandingly executed. So I have Ty
And
West at number 10.
that's just a testament to his ability for filmmaking, where he can do something like, for me, the hidden gem is the House of the Devil, because it's such a homage to 70s filmmaking. I felt like at times I was watching a 70s film. Like, it's just done that well, you know what I mean? But like, it's done on purpose, and it's like, this is so good. And then he can turn around and do something like X, like you said, and just make it feel, give it that gritty 70s feel. And then he can turn around and do a found footage and make it feel like a found footage, right? So like, I think he just has a lot of depth, and so I think he definitely deserves to be that high up on the list.
He approaches films like he is a historian of horror himself,
A student of film, yeah.
and pays homage to those roots in a beautiful way.
I agree. Number 9, we have Dario Argento, born 1940 in Rome. He's an Italian filmmaker and producer. And as a teenager, he worked as a film critic, writing for magazines, and a columnist in a Rome newspaper. And then in 1970, he made his first film, The Bird with the Crystal Plumage. His influential work in the horror during the 70s and 80s for the giallo subgenre led him to be known as the master of horror. And he also served as a consultant to Romero's Dawn of the Dead movie in 1978, and for Martin in 1977. So he was also, he was taking his expertise and consulting some of these other giants of the industry as well. Movies like Deep Red, Tenebrae, Inferno. Those were all, we covered Deep Red, one of the better works that he did.
Yeah, yeah, and we also covered Opera, which was a later work. For me, my favorite Argento film, and I've seen documentaries on him, and I love his fascinating use of camera angles and his use of music. He's a musician himself. He always uses the band Goblin, which delivers a pulsing, hard, throbbing score. My favorite film of his is Suspiria. I think that is the pinnacle of his art, and one of the best horror movies of the 70s and of all time.
Awesome.
Okay, excellent. We're getting into the heavy hitters here now, aren't we?
Yeah.
At number 8 on our list of top 20 horror directors of all time is David Cronenberg, who is known as the master of body horror, a Canadian director whose influences are found throughout modern horror. He started in the 70s with low budget films, producing the memorable Rabid and The Brood, which are two just very unique films and different from anything else that you had seen at that point. Into the 80s, he got more critical acclaim with films like Scanners, with the famous head bursting scene.
The head burst on TV, yeah.
And Videodrome, which was another twisted piece of body horror starring James Woods and Deborah Harry. He did a very good and very tame and controlled Stephen King adaptation with The Dead Zone, which we've talked about. And then in 1986, his masterpiece, The Fly. He took the old hokey sci-fi story from the 50s, used the name, but basically reinvented it in a modern science fiction body horror that is nearly perfect.
Yeah. One of the best horror movies of all time, in my opinion. I mean, it's up there. There's a huge list, but it's up there.
Absolutely. he diversified from that point forward with some non-traditional horror themes with movies like Dead Ringers and Naked Lunch, Existence, and Crash is a crazy movie if you've never seen it. It's about people who get off on having sex in car accidents. Um, he moved into some excellent thrillers with like History of Violence and Eastern Promises, and he recently returned to body horror with Crimes of the Future. He also his son Brandon is producing modern body horror. So I almost feel like there's a resurgence for David Cronenberg on the horizon.
That's great, and we'll see more body horror. The next generation of it. I know he's coming out with the movie in January 2025 called The Shrouds. So that should be interesting.
Yeah, love to see more from him. He's also dabbled in acting. He was in Clive Barker's
Jason X.
Nightbreed, and oddly enough, in Jason X for some
Yeah.
reason. But
Yeah, for some reason. Yeah.
yeah, his influence
He just
runs
he
deep.
strolled into set one day and they were like, "Hey, it's Cronenberg."
So I got to assume The Fly is your favorite Cronenberg movie.
Absolutely.
For all
Yeah.
his quality work, it's hard to pick anything else.
Exactly. I mean, yeah, he's got a ton of great movies. You could get a bucket of DVDs of Cronenberg movies, but yeah, The Fly. I mean, it's still good to this day.
Well, how good is our rest of our list then if David Cronenberg's number 8?
Yeah, it's pretty. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I mean, these are the heavy hitters, like you said.
Yeah.
Some of it, it's modern. Some of it is kind of the people who had to walk so other people could run, right? So you kind of have to have a little of both. For number 7, we have James Whale, who was an English film director, theater director, and actor, born in 1989 and died in 1957. He enlisted in the army. 1889. That's what I meant to say. I'm sorry. Yeah, he enlisted in the army in World War I and then became an officer and then was captured by the Germans. And while he was captured by the Germans, that's kind of when he decided he wanted to be an actor. So he got into acting and set design and directing when he was released. And he went on to direct a play called Journey's End in 1928 and then went off to Hollywood. And then 3 years later, he brought us the iconic Frankenstein in 1931. And then shortly after that, The Bride of Frankenstein and then Invisible Man.
Yeah, I'm always amazed at in a almost a 2.5 year stretch. James Whale put out Frankenstein, Old Dark House, and The Mummy.
Yeah.
Between 1931 and 1932, and it's like,
Yeah.
holy cow.
Yeah.
To me, and you touched on it, my favorite James Whale film is Bride of Frankenstein.
Yep.
Which I think is an amazing movie that holds up to this day, and I think it's the high point of the Universal monster era.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, he ushered in the modern Frankenstein that we know to this day. Like the little kids know, we've talked about this before. It's like it's up there with, creating Frankenstein like that to me is kind of up there with creating zombies, right? Like you've kind of created this iconic character that's lasted 100 years that everyone can recognize. And I think to do that, he deserves to be this high up on the list.
Great choice. Number 6 on our list of top 20 horror directors is the Italian film god Mario Bava. Mario began directing in 1960 and released one of his best known and one of the seminal Italian horror films, Black Sunday, a tale of witchcraft that just his abilities as a director became apparent immediately. He brought forth the Boris Karloff anthology Black Sabbath, a movie that
Which we
have covered.
Yeah.
The Fashion House Murders of Blood and Black Lace. He dabbled in sci-fi. He dabbled in fantasy. He put out I actually really like this movie. It's a sci-fi horror called Planet of Vampires. And he had an early foray into Giallo with Hatchet for the Honeymoon. And we've also talked on this show before about the first slasher, and historians usually point to Black Christmas, but I would give you Bay of Blood as a candidate, which predates Black Christmas by 3 years and is truly a slasher. Was released in the U.S. originally as Twitch of the Death Nerve, but to me, it created the blueprint for all future slashers, including the fact that it has some deaths that were copied in Friday the 13th.
Hmm.
So
Which,
I
which,
think,
which, I mean, which is further cements that idea. It's like, well, if they were using it in 80s slashers, if they were doing it back then clearly that was the first slasher. I think that's good evidence.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's in my opinion, that's the answer to that question. If you want to talk North American slashers, okay, I guess that's different.
Right.
As far as a hidden gem, I have a soft place in my heart for Hercules and the Haunted World from 1961. I actually purchased this movie
Yeah.
on Betamax because I was such a fan of it. And so Mario Bava, very influential, made some great films and made Italian films a real force in horror.
Yeah. And I love Black Sabbath. That was a great film.
Excellent.
For number five, we have James Wan, born in 1977. He's an Australian filmmaker that co-created both the Saw and Insidious franchises, as well as creating the Conjuring universe, which has already grossed $2 billion. He graduated from RMIT in 1999 with a degree in media, and very shortly after, 5 years later, in 2004, he directed his first movie, Saw, which spawned a franchise that has gone on for 20 years still to this day. We just had one that was released this past year. Um, I think he came along when he was able to get out of the whole. I mean, I know he does jump scares, but I think he was able to create really good atmospheres and get away from the jump scare trend that was really happening in like the early mid 2000s with a lot of the films. And I think that kind of helped him rise above and make something that was a little bit more unique with his haunting experiences that he had with like Insidious and The Conjuring. And he was just able to create really good atmospheres. And I still, what's great is he's really young. And I think we have another 20, 30 years of James Wan to do who knows what.
Yeah, agree. I'm a little disappointed that he's been stolen by the superhero universe, and I
Yeah.
hope he keeps his feet in the horror world because, like you said, he's a franchise maker. He's
Yeah.
created, multiple franchises that are
Yeah,
hugely
at least.
successful.
One of his hidden gems, to me, because I know a lot of people haven't seen this movie, Malignant, which came out a couple years ago. He does a lot of the body horror and stuff. I loved it. I love that kind of stuff. More of that. He can just keep doing stuff like that. A movie like that every couple of years, I'll be happy. But it's that movie's crazy.
My favorite movie that I wrote for James Wan is
Yeah,
Malignant because
yeah,
it's
yeah,
just so different and unique, and I love the energy he brings to it. Yeah, you're right.
yeah.
It's a
This
great movie.
energy, like you said. Yep.
Okay. Number four on our list of top 20 horror directors of all time, Toby Hooper. Uh, Toby Hooper took off in 1974 with, he had made a couple films before, a documentary and a kind of a hippie movie. 1974, he came out with Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which, as we've discussed on this show, is still my favorite horror movie of all time. And that with that, he started a stretch of an unbelievable string of success. He followed up with Eaten Alive, which is a bit of an underseen gem. But then he did the TV adaptation of Stephen King's Salem's Lot, which is highly regarded and is still very creepy. He did an underrated horror movie called The Fun House, and then he culminated with the massive Steven Spielberg produced hit Poltergeist. That's as good and impactful of run of films as anyone has ever put together.
Yeah,
Uh,
to start your career off, he's doing pretty good.
yeah, he followed that up with a my sleeper, my underrated Toby Hooper film is space vampires in the movie Life Force. Very underrated, very underappreciated. He finally was forced back into trying to catch lightning in a bottle twice with finally sequelizing Texas Chainsaw Massacre with a part two, which he added black comedy to the formula. And by most accounts, he kind of missed the mark. Particularly, it's so hard when you're sequelizing something that's on such a pedestal.
Yeah, but on the other hand, when you creating like Leatherface, creating this character that's so iconic, it's all over Halloween, right? Like it's just one of those characters. It's all over the whole. Like it's when you see horror posters, you see Leatherface. Like he created this character. It's like you kind of want to keep going with it and see what else you can do with it possibly, or just do something with that atmosphere, with that story. So I kind of understand when something's that great, people want more of it, and when there's an opportunity, sometimes they just go with it. Um, on the other hand, I've always disagreed. I've always been weary of something was done really well and like 10, 20 years later, hey, let's do a sequel. I'm like, you guys missed the boat.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? Like you kind of like it's
Yeah.
too late. You know what I mean? Like you should have done it a year or two after. You know what I mean? Like because I just don't see any evidence of how often that works where there's a good movie and then they do a sequel 15 years later finally and it's equally good. It just never works out like that.
And we've talked about one of the greatest qualities of Texas Chainsaw Massacre is that grimy, uh, dirty, scuzzy feeling that permeates the entire film.
Yeah.
And you didn't capture that in 1986. You didn't get that same feel. I would argue that Ty West got a closer feel to that with X than they got with Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2.
That's a great point. That's a really good point. I would agree with that. Sometimes, um, when an artist has less, they're able to be more creative, right? It's out of that necessity of I don't have a lot to work with, so now I'm forced to be creative. And they come up with ingenious new ways of doing things out of the lack of resources that they have, right? And so through it being his first movie with lack of resources, he was able to capture something that was just more raw and gritty that people were like, whoa, right? And then you try to recapture that, but now you have more resources and all this money, and it just has this glam to it that just doesn't feel as gritty, and it just doesn't feel the same. So it's really hard to kind of recapture that.
Yeah, I didn't love Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. Saw it, of course. I wasn't going to miss it. Just the tone didn't feel right to me.
Yeah.
From that point, his career declined with forgettable low budget films with declining quality, with the one possible exception being the Toolbox Murders from 2004,
Hmm.
which is a remake of a movie you might not even know existed, that you didn't know you needed a remake, but it's actually a pretty decent film. So,
Yeah.
uh, but that stretch that Toby Hooper put together between 1974 and 1986 is as good of a 10, 11 year run, 12-year run as you could
You're
imagine.
you're ever gonna get, and it's just iconic. And I think Eaten Alive's underrated. I love that movie. I love the style of it. I love the aesthetic. It just feels swampy and murky, and I think Neville Brand does a great job acting in it. I really liked it.
A
You
young
get
Robert Englund
yeah,
uh,
yeah,
scene
yeah.
chewing there.
Buck, yeah,
Fuck.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So Toby Hooper was my number four.
yeah. For number three, we have George Romero. He was born in 1940 and died in 2017. He was an American-Canadian film director, writer, editor, and actor. After graduating college in 1960, he began shooting short films, and later in 1968, effectively gave us an entire genre of modern zombies. He gave us the rules for slow-moving zombies. You have to shoot them in the head. If they bite you, then you become one. And not only that, but he also just didn't have tasteless, horror. He always put intelligent social commentary intertwined into his films. And I think that kind of gave it an added level of effect to his movies where you were watching something where he was subtly trying to talk about society, but also just creating this whole new genre that we still use to this day.
Yeah, I think I agree with that point. I think a lot of people when they try to make a message film, it's not an entertaining film because
It's
you're beaten over the
pretentious.
head with the message.
Yep.
George Romero films are immensely entertaining with a
Yes.
with a with a message, woven in.
It's metaphorical, right? You can sit there and debate it. Like, was he really saying this? Is he really saying that? Like, it's not like the characters are splatting it out to you, right? Like you have to be paying attention, right?
The other thing I love about Romero is his library is so diverse. Like he's known
Mm,
for the zombie movies, of course.
of course. Yeah.
Any list of zombie movies has three of his in the top 10, including probably the top two or three spots. Um, but we talked on this show, we covered Martin,
Martin.
which is
Yep.
an amazing twist on the vampire genre. He did Creepshow, which is one of the best anthologies ever made.
Yeah.
He did The Dark Half, which is a Stephen King, complete twist. And then he'd do movies like Night Riders with this
Night
band of
Riders, yeah.
traveling motorcycle people doing jousting in like medieval times. Like, and one of my favorite movies of his that nobody knows about and nobody talks about is Monkey Shines.
Yeah, I don't know that one.
Monkey Shines is it's like it's so different. It's about a man who's crippled, and they're training monkeys to serve as like service animals,
Hmm.
but this lab is injecting him with human brain cells, and it's just such a good
It's
movie.
just wild. Yeah, I'll have to watch that.
It's intelligent, it's tense. Yeah, I love Romero. I could go on all day about
Yeah,
his
yeah.
movies.
I mean, this top three right here is I feel like we could just flip it around all day. Tomorrow I might be like, yeah, maybe he is the best director. You can kind of. It was so hard. It was so hard to really delegate which goes where, but
Sure.
they're all up there.
That's the beauty of lists. I think you could shuffle the top four
You could
and be
shuffle it,
okay
yeah.
either way.
As long as they're up there, right? As long as they're on the top, yeah.
We're supposed to pick our favorite. So many. Loved all of his work, but gun to my head, Dawn of the Dead. Dawn of the Dead is my favorite.
Yeah, mm, yeah. You know what? Yeah, I like the original. I like the original.
Hmm.
I mean that it's something about. I'm kind of a sucker for black and white movies. I don't know what it is. Like when I watched The Mist and I got to watch it in black and white, it was just awesome.
Yeah.
They had the new Godzilla movie -1 came out and you could watch it in black and white and I loved it. Like I loved that you could. I don't know. I'm kind of a sucker for that, so I like the original.
I got you. Okay. Well, the great George Romero at number three. All right. Number two on our list is John Carpenter, who began his career as a musician, but directed a small budget gem called Assault on Precinct 13, which creates a tense standoff, and it showcased his ability to build atmosphere. It's a very good movie. It was actually remade, and the remake never lives up
Mhm.
to the original. He
No.
broke into mainstream with the massive success of Halloween in 1978, creating an enduring horror franchise and creating a template for a decade or two of lesser copycats.
Yeah. Yeah.
He followed that up with the creepy historical haunting of The Fog and the hugely influential dystopian Escape from New York, which I love. His next film proved to be his most important film, but at the time for a lot of the wrong reasons. The Thing in 1982 is now considered an undisputed classic of the genre, a groundbreaking piece of cinema. The atmosphere, the tension, and the unbelievable special effects.
Special effects. Yeah.
But at the time of its release, it was dismissed by critics and audiences alike, something we've talked about before. It proved to be a huge flop, and it hurt Carpenter's standing with the studios and curtailed his abilities to make the films he wanted to make, get the budgets he wanted to get. So you look back on Carpenter's legacy, and I'm going to say The Thing is his best film. Some people might say Halloween, but to me, The Thing as a
It's the thing.
it's just such an outstanding, technically achieved piece of filmmaking. It's his best film, and it may have ruined his career, which is
Which
ironic
is
to think
which
about.
is ironic, right? Right. Because I have it down as it's one of my favorite horror movies of all time. Yeah, it's absolutely his best.
And it just makes me want to go back in time and just run around slapping people and getting social media involved that didn't exist in 1982.
Right.
So please, people, you got to see this movie. It's
Right.
unbelievable.
Watch it in 4K. Trust me.
So he continued to make films, but his standing was hurt. He fought through those difficulties to make the Stephen King adaptation of Christine. He did The Prince of Darkness and the excellent subliminal message film They Live. He went Lovecraftian with In the Mouth of Madness
Yep.
and did a classic remake with Village of the Damned and sequelized his own film with Escape from L.A. Pretty much all of those were poorly received, and the reception got less and less with each one. He scored a decent hit with the action horror Vampires in 1998, and then bombed badly with his next film, Ghosts of Mars.
Yeah.
That put him out of directing for 9 years until 2010. He made a film called The Ward, which was also very poorly received. Um, and he hasn't directed anything since. But he is known for creating memorable scores. He scored a lot of his own films and other films.
Hmm.
The pulsing score for the Shutter app, the Shutter streaming service, is
Yeah.
created by John Carpenter.
Oh, that's
And he
cool.
also participates in anthologies such as Body Bags, which he produced, and was he did a couple episodes of The Masters of Horror. Just an iconic horror director who created, some iconic movies, created a franchise that's enduring to this day, and one of the
Absolutely.
best movies of all time with The Thing. So,
Yeah, yeah, rightly so. Right there at number two could possibly be number one, right? I mean, one of the most influential directors of all time for sure. Like I said, The Thing is it's a masterpiece to me. Like every time I watch it, I'm like, how is this from the 80s?
yeah,
It's just so good. So
early
ahead of its
80s.
time. Early, yeah, E too.
Yeah.
Um, for number one, I picked Wes Craven. Born in 1939, died in 2015. He was an American filmmaker, director, screenwriter, producer, actor, editor. He did it all. He earned his degree in English and psychology and then later went on to get a master's degree in philosophy. He taught English from 64 to 65. And while he was teaching, he got a 16 millimeter camera and just started making movies at home. And then later left academia and started directing pornographic films. And just his first feature film came out in 1972, The Last House on the Left, which was a highly graphic film for that time, was very scrutinized. And it was kind of you could kind of see when you watched that movie where he had come from the kind of the pornographic film industry. It was there was a lot of sexual the girl gets raped. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, the whole film was very heavy on that. But he then moved on and pioneered the slasher genre, adding a lot of adding a lot of satire and humor to it, which is very noticeable in like the Scream and the Nightmare on Elm Street franchises. So he was really like exploring like the kind of dark humor in the slashers. And he would also, he dealt with a lot of exploring like dreams and reality and kind of like the difference between those things and trying to like mess with people's minds. And I think he did it in a very unique way and came up with some fascinating characters. He made movies for over 5 decades, up until 2011. Making multiple franchises, The Hills Have Eyes, the Nightmare on Elm Street, the Scream franchises, just household name horror movies that just spanned multiple decades.
Excellent choice. It was your pick, but I salute you for it because when I look at Wes Craven and the iconic films he's produced over time, I think it's fascinating to go back and look at the differences in his films and how he evolved with each decade. And you mentioned
Yes.
Last House on the Left. Then he had Hills Head Eyes in the 70s. And then in the 80s, he completely shifted. He went more into he did the Nightmare on Elm Street. He did the Serpent in the Rainbow, which is an underrated gem for
That
sure.
was my hidden gem with Serpent in the Rainbow. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Freaked me out. It freaked me out as a kid. I was
And then
like,
in the 90s, he does the meta self-aware Scream. And I would even say into the 2000s, he directed a fantastic thriller called Red Eye with
yeah,
Cillian Murphy and Rachel McAdams.
yeah,
His ability to, you wouldn't think the guy that made Red Eye and the guy that made Last House on the Left were the same guy, but he
right.
evolved and he is really an icon of the 70s. He's an icon of the 80s. He's an icon of the 90s, and even was influential into the 2000s.
And did well in the 2000s. Yeah, like
Amazing.
no one else did that. And that's why I picked him for number one. You know, no one else did that. Like he was able to, like you say, evolve with the industry. And even when he did Scream, he's like, fine, I'll mock the genre that I helped build, but I'm
Yeah,
also gonna make it one of the best movies of that genre that you're gonna enjoy. And it's just like he did it. Right?
yeah,
So like it's mocking the genre, but ends up being one of the best movies of the genre. Like it's
yeah.
just you throw your hands up, you're like, all right,
Slashers are dead. Okay, well, let me do this
okay,
and
yeah, watch
reinvent
this.
everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I think is the
Yeah.
biggest testament to him is that reinvention.
Yeah, he's
over and
genius.
over and over.
Yep.
All right. Excellent list. Excellent list. As we
Yeah,
mentioned, these
that
are
was
the
fun.
rock stars that build the building blocks of the movies that we all love. With some new blood on the horizon, this would be fascinating to look at years down the road and see how it changes.
Yeah, in the next couple of years, Wes Craven will still be number one, but because some of these guys have a lot of time to catch up to doing 5 decades of movies.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. Some of the new filmmakers seem to, Fede Alvarez did Evil Dead in 2012, 2013. I think it hit theaters.
Yeah.
He did Don't Breathe,
Hmm.
and now he's doing Alien. Like that's 12 years to get three films.
Yeah, yeah,
Back in the day, people were spitting out a film a year.
yeah. Every year, it's like, all right, you made one. We got to do another summer blockbuster. We got to do another, Halloween type movie for the fall. Yeah, we got to keep churning these out. And the industry's changed, right? I mean, you also have more people making movies. Budgets have changed, right?
Yeah. Yep, very true. All right, excellent list. A lot of fun. We love doing these. Congrats on finalizing our 75th episode. Something to be proud of for sure.
Yeah, yeah. It's been fun.
All right, we're the Weekly Horoscope. I'm Jerry. That's Matt. Thank you for watching, listening, however you're finding us, and we'll see you next time. Have a good one.
All right, thanks, Jerry. Thank you, everyone.
Your weekly horoscope with Jerry and Matt.